Hello everyone and welcome back to True EV. I came up with this concept a while back that is called the fold of a lion, folding like a lion. And that might sound a bit like a contradiction at first because lions are brave and fearless, of course, and folding is a timid, passive line. But actually, it takes a lot of guts to fold hands that have a lot of absolute hand strength, especially when you were formerly considering them value bets and you were attached to them and you were putting money into the pot and hoping to win a big pot. And of course, attachment and hope and all of these things are kind of the enemy of the poker player, but we're going to feel them because we're human. And so the fold of a lion is the type of fold where we can let go of a hand that is in very, very bad shape, but was formerly in good shape, or maybe would normally be in good shape given the absolute hand strength of the hand, such as nut flush. Normally when you have the nut flush, folding isn't really on your radar, and so your brain is a visual pattern recognizing machine that is going to not want to fold the nut flush even when the nut flush is toast. In this video, what we're going to do is learn how to fold like a lion and look at some spots where we should be making lion folds. These are obviously very underbluff spots. We're going to start off with a hand that I played kind of badly, actually. I don't like the way I played the river in this hand at all, and I'll explain why. And then we're going to look at a hand where one of my opponents made the fold of a lion and actually showed us their cards. And we're going to finish off by looking at a hand where we didn't get fold. We actually bluffed and got called. The bluff didn't work out. But it's a spot where if you face the same action, you should probably be folding a ton and just looking to exploit by folding like a lion. So let's start with this ace-queen hand here, and I'll show you what I mean. This is one of the biggest skills, by the way, that is going to unlock the route out of micro stakes and low stakes for you guys. If you are stuck at poker and you find that downswings are wiping out all of your profits and your blue line is taking a big hit whenever cooler situations happen where you lose a stack with a nut flush, it may be that they're not coolers. Because in many of the situations where you have an incredibly strong absolute hand strength hand and face some kind of all-in on the river or something, these are very underbluff spots. So this hand's a good illustrator of that. So we go for a 3-bet here with ace-queen of diamonds, cut off against hijack, villain calls, and we get a board of 10-10-7. With ace-queen here, you can bet small, you can bet big. You could check, but I think this is a board that, generally speaking, you're going to get a lot of fold equity on, and your range is doing well here and denying equity to large parts of villain's range, but just starting to bet is definitely a good idea. I think ace-queen of diamonds is fine with any action here. Really, I don't want to get lost in the weeds of that. The king of diamonds comes on the turn, and this is very much a card that's amazing for our range. It's a card that's going to basically skew towards a range bet again, in theory. So GTO is actually going to bet range fully on turn cards like this in 3-bet pots for the most part. Our hand is an amazing semi-bluff. We have a great SBR here as well, that when we bet big, villain can't really jam anything, doesn't really want to jam bolts here anyway. They want to be slow playing those because they are invincible. And you can see why, right? It doesn't really make sense to make your opponent fold their bluff range and their value range here. You know, our value range here is aces and ace-king and 10x and stuff like that and full houses. And it's going to be betting river at a very high frequency as well. So villain calls here. This call is already a very rare action because usually this spot goes bet and fold, because when villain has 9s or 8s or 6s or something, they usually just get folded on this node. So what is villain's range here? Probably like slow played pocket 7s, some kind of king queen of spades, king queen of clubs that's just hit the turn, ace king that's just hit the turn, 10x, and then something like jacks or queens maybe at a rare small frequency as well. Something like that for the most part. Maybe king jack as well, king jack suited that's hit the turn and floated on the flop. So the jack of diamonds on the river. This is not a royal flush, that's the first thing to note. It very nearly is, if only one of those 10s was a diamond. Our hand is obviously good here, but when you think about it, jack 10, pocket jacks, king 10 and pocket 7s are still some hands that beat us, so our hand is not invincible, and I don't think we should be going all in here. I think if we go all in here against what looked like an ABC kind of reg, the regs in these games, 100 Russian cash challenge, they're not overly strong or creative. They're pretty ABC, and they're mainly looking to just make money from leaderboards and rake back and splash pots and fish and stuff like that. So in my mind, this is going to be a very straightforward range playing in a straightforward way. And there's some patterns here that basically mean that if we do go all in, we're really beginning to overplay this hand. And the patterns are just that villain's range is kind of split into things like king X, like king queen or ace king, which is not a very good hand on this run out. It's okay, but it's not very good. It's not that likely to call a jam. And then something really good like jack 10 or pocket jacks or king 10 or pocket 7s or quad 10s or something like that. Now there's maybe a bit of ace 10 in villain's range as well here, which might call all in, but it might not. There's maybe ace queen, though that feels weird. We have the ace and queen of diamonds, so I don't know what ace queen is calling the big turn bet, so probably not that either. I think this is a spot where if we go all in, we don't do too well. So we bet smaller. The sizing is, I think, a little big, and the reason for that is the villain has very few combos of naked 10 here. Like Queen 10 suited is, what, 2 combos, Ace 10 suited is 1 combo. It's very little trips here. Jack 10 suited is only 1 as well, but Jacks is 3, 7s is 3 ostensibly if they've not raised by now. King 10 is 1. I just think overall, we may not be doing amazingly when called with this sizing. I think we'll be a favourite when called with this sizing. I don't think we'll be doing incredibly well when villain continues here. So I think a bit smaller is good because many villains' bluff catchers here are just King X and they're not very strong on this run out, and there's very little trips in the opponent's range here. Maybe 10-9 exists as well, actually, yeah. So maybe a bit smaller than this is good. So that's what I mean when I say I don't think I played this hand optimally. But then we got jammed on. Sizing's a bit awkward there in the replayer, but yeah, it's the rest of our stack. We need 23% pot odds to call here, and we have a bluff catcher because we were repping flushes and boats, basically, when we bet the river here, and villain jamming over the top of us is now saying that they have a full house, not a flush. So that's the first thing to recognise here, is that your formerly good value betty, almost looks like a royal flush but isn't hand, has been demoted to the status of lowly bluff catcher. And what that means is that we are beating no value bets whatsoever. So we're only really winning in this spot when villain is bluffing. They're not getting to this river with a worse flush. They're not jamming trips here for value. This is a bluff catcher. The nut flush is a bluff catcher. So let go of the notion that the nut flush is good. A bluff catcher is not a good hand. Ever. Okay, it's fine. They can call sometimes. If the spot's over bluffed or if the spot's bluffed enough, it can call. But it's not a good hand. It's not a value beater hand, as we say in CPS, grade 2, lecture 8, where we dive into the bluff catching system. Check it out. Bluff catchers are always calls in overbluffed situations and always folds in underbluffed situations. And if you're not sure, that's when you can start looking at things like your blocker caliber on the river and the nitty-gritty factors that aren't the broad strokes. This spot, needless to say, is very, very underbluffed, because to bluff, villain would need to have king without a diamond blocker because we have the diamond blockers. So you need to have like king queen of hearts or something. He would need to have ace king off. He would need to be turning a 10 into a bluff, pocket queens into a bluff, something like this. How attractive is it to jam as a bluff into a range of like flushes and boats that's betting for value? I can be bluffing here, sure, but to bluff jam this river, villain's going to need to make me fold a bunch of value bets too. It's not going to be enough to just make me fold my bluffs. That will not be enough fold equity for this risk reward. This is a spot where if we call, we almost always lose. And I don't really want to even say this is the fold of a lion. I think this is a really easy fold once you know what's going on. But many people who are stuck at 25 NL or something like that are stuck because they are unwilling to part with a high absolute hand strength hand in a chronically underbluffed spot. And that's a big problem. So pay attention to this. Ask yourself honestly, is my hand beating value bets or is it only beating bluffs? And if you start with that question, it's going to be much easier to let go of your hand when you then deem that your opponent is very unlikely to ever be bluffing this node. The way this works demographically, just so we can understand this, it's not that every opponent is bluffing rarely. That isn't an accurate way of depicting this. Rather, it's that some opponents are maniacal and are over bluffing because they just pick up king queen and go, I'm all in, I'm going to make him fold. And that's about 1% of people. And the rest of the humans in the world are just never bluffing. So if you surveyed, I don't know, 100 humans and said, how often have you bluffed this spot? 99 of them would say never. Probably at these stakes. This is 100 Russian cash. If you play 25 NL, if you play 10 NL, if you play micro stakes, obviously it's even less likely to be bluffed. Even if you play high stakes, very unlikely that the regs there are even finding the bluffs here because they'd have to be creative geniuses to do it. They'd have to be a little bit, you know, not quite fully there in the head to be sick enough to do it as well. So this is a spot where you should plan to bet fold. I think my sizing's a little big for the spot actually in real life here. Even if I do have the equity that can bet this size, I'm not sure it's the right thing to do. And then I think this is just a very important fold to make. I was nowhere near calling here. There was no bone in my body that was even remotely considering calling here because I'm just aware that it's hemorrhaging. We're very far away from 23% win percentage in this spot. Let's look at this hand now with pocket 8s. In fact, let's look at pocket 6s first, then we'll come back to pocket 8s. So we have an open from cutoff and we 3-bet the 6s in the small blind. And this is just something I do when I think I've got an edge. I just 3-bet a little bit wider. And this is not a hemorrhaging 3-bet by any means at equilibrium, and it's going to be definitely fine in reality. But having shown you that we have 6s here, I'd actually like you to try to forget that we have 6s here. And forget that villain has ace queen here. because what we're going to do is look at this with the cards off. There we go. We don't know anyone's hand. Your memory has been erased. So there's a call from cutoff. The flop is Queen 10-7, two-tone. Hero, the 3-flop 3-better, who doesn't have sixes. He has a range. C-bet small. Okay, normal. Cutoff calls. This is going to be a range of, well, top pair, second pair, little tiny bit of third pair. Not a lot, given it's a 3-bet pot. Flush draws, jacks, maybe nines, that kind of thing. Ace king off, ace jack. Lots of stuff. Not fives, probably. Jack of diamonds. This card is notably great for the small blinds range. It also makes some 2-pair and sets and stuff for cutoff as well, but it's the kind of card that makes 1 pair a really lousy hand. In this situation, it is very difficult to bluff enough. You can bluff with ace-6 suited, right? So if you're 3-betting enough ace-5, ace-4 suited, etc. pre, you can bluff enough with that. So I guess it's not that hard. But if you have an underpair, you're probably not going to find a bluff here, and you don't have very many underpairs either because you're small blind. So a lot of people will just check with 9s here or 8s here because they're not really thinking about range construction and how to actually bluff a lot on a texture that's really good for you. Your 16 ace king combos that your opponent doesn't really have. They have some of them maybe, but hardly any, because they would 4-bet pre in late position most of the time. This is even better for you, by the way, against button or blind versus blind because they have even less ace king. But those 16 ace king combos have just hit the nuts. And in the mind of your opponent, they're going to be very obvious. It's very easy to imagine that your opponent has ace king here. And we also have a load of other value bets like 2-pair and sets and stuff like that as well. So when I bet the turn here with a range of, I guess, ace king, sets, some overpair type combo like kings, some 2-pair type combo sometimes like queen jack, and then some ace-6 suited bluffs, I'm still not bluffing enough, right? Even if I do bluff the combos of like ace-5 suited that I have, I'm not going to be bluffing enough given that my value range is gargantuan. It's huge. It's colossal. How many more adjectives can I think of? Not many. So we probably want to go ahead and bluff some underpair here as well. Be a bit tricky. Find some bluffs that aren't so natural in order to not succumb to the pool's tendency to grossly underbluff this. Now, where does this come in? Like, I have sixes, villain has ace queen. Why is this relevant to today's topic, you may ask? With ace queen against this bet, villain is in a really bad spot. Because in a micro stakes or low stakes pool, and I'm assuming most of you watching this are playing somewhere 100 NL or below for the most part. I know that won't be all of you, but those of you playing higher, there will still be weaker players in your games that are still playing like the players lower down. When you face this turn bet here, you are going to be doing very badly with ace queen. It's a 3-bet pot. Ace king is here pure. It's not slow playing enough. Queens is here pure. Jacks is here pure. Tens is here pure. People aren't slow playing these hands enough. People aren't finding the bluff with ace-6 suited all the time. They're just giving up because they don't like the look of this. It's intimidating. It's gross. They're rarely finding bets with underpairs here at all. So you should fold ace queen. You should fold ace queen if you're playing 50 NL and you face this double barrel. You should fold top pair gutter. And I know you don't want to. I know that like normally top pair and a gutter to the nuts is not a fold. But in this situation, on this very turn against the bet in this pool, villain actually makes a very good fold here. Okay, he should have known it was me. And he should have called because I'm bluffing underpairs like a maniac and 3-betting 2 wide pre. And I'm like the one player in this pool probably who's actually bluffing enough here. But overall, this is a fold. And I'd imagine this player does quite well in this pool when he makes this fold. I'd imagine that this player is a winning player, at least after rake back, because it takes a competent opponent to fold a hand like this. If you know your opponent's recreational, this turn barrel's not going to be that good, but against the reg, it should be fine. But the bigger, more instructive point here is that when you are in the shoes of the cutoff and you have the ace queen off and you face this, it's time to recognize that your absolutely strong top pairing gutter hand is relatively speaking very, very weak because the spot is underbluffed and it's a bluff catcher. I'm not going to have king queen here or worse with the sizing for value. So this is a bluff catcher. Again, this concept of bluff catcher from Clarke Poker School Grade 2, Lectures 7 and 8 is so important for letting go of hands that look kind of good in spots where they're not really good at all. So I didn't manage to show 1-6 here. I wanted to show one of my sixes, but I timed out. That would have been fun. Didn't quite get to it. But yeah, nice to get this one through. Okay, on to another hand. Spots can be underbluffed because of action sequence, how much ranges have filtered already, texture, how difficult it is to land on the river with air, how natural it is to want to bluff in the way that you are investing if you do have air, how scary looking the opponent's range is, and how polarized it looks. Like, people are not going to bluff you a lot when your range looks scary and polarized. So all of these things need to be factored into account. This hand here is very much about action sequence and texture and how the two combine. There's a lot of imbalance going on in low stakes and micro stakes, and that's why we have a series like True EV. What do you think your opponent's range is at 100 NL when they check behind on king, ace, ace? Do you think this is a weak range without much showdown value that's just basically giving up with 5 high? Do you think this is a slow play, trappy hand like ace queen or king's full? Or do you think this is mostly mediocre stuff, showdown value, pocket pair, king x? If you answered the last option, well done. That's what you're going to see here. People are not shy about c-betting in poker. Ace ace king when you have air is a very easy, straightforward c-bet to make, and people know that. When a weaker player, recreational, checks a board like this, it's very often because they have a mediocre hand. They have a king. They have pocket jacks. They have something like that. When it goes check check here, big blind against hijack, single raise pot, and we're in the big blind and we probe the sizing, we pretty much have value in real life. I'll level with you. I'm not really bluffing this spot. Even if I have a hand like jack 10, which is completely allowed to bluff here, in theory, I'm going to get less fold equity than I'm supposed to because this range is just overprotected in 80% of opponents' games. There are some players, by the way, that do just check back 5 high and fold to turn. It can happen, but by and large, this turn bet's getting called an overwhelmingly large amount of the time. If you think about it, we're betting about 3/4 pot, and so villain is supposed to be folding only about 42, 43%, but that's still quite a lot, and I think the fold equity here is sub 30% comfortably. This is the line where the usual strategy of just probing turn and attacking that works quite well on some textures doesn't work so well on really notably good textures for the hijack like ace ace king. So this is, I'm going to have a value hand here pretty much all the time in exploitative reality, and I'm going to be very fit or fold in this spot because this is an overprotected spot. But when villain calls and the king river comes, this is one of the least appetizing bluff spots in the game tree for a human. When you're the big blind here and you know that your opponent has a king an enormously large amount of the time here, and sometimes just has like queens or jacks that have some showdown as well, I think it's very unappetizing to bluff. And so if you are hijack here and you face this line of someone going bet into you on a texture like this, even though they have a wide big blind range, and even though in theory they could have 5-4 and 5-6 and 10-9 and just all this trash, and this is usually an overbluff node by action sequence, right? We know from Grade E, Carrot Poker School, and other mass data sources, potentially, that when flop goes check-check and people lead the turn in the river, they're overbluffing a bit, in general. More so when they just lead the river, but when they lead turn and river, they're still overbluffing. But textures provide really stark exceptions. So a texture like this is so unappetizing to bluff on that you're going to see a very big drop in bluff to value frequency when the river is a king like this. Does that mean that villains should fold with a king? Yeah, probably. That's kind of sick, right? But big exploits are available, because what's going on here is that I just have an ace a ton because humans don't like bluffing this run out at all. Some will, like maniacs and stuff. So many players in the big blind shoes here on ace, ace, king, king, 8 at these stakes just aren't bluffing this river. They're just not at all. And some are overdoing it, and they're a minority, but it's another one of these textures where people are repulsed. They're just not finding bluffs. So should villain fold king jack here? I don't know. It feels almost impossible, right? It feels crazy because you're folding a boat, but absolute hand strength is a silent killer. If you think about your hand as a boat, you're in big trouble. Big blind doesn't have a king here. You're not chopping because big blind led the turn big. Big blind is more polarized than a king. Big blind is saying they have an ace or a bluff. On the river, it's the same thing. They still have an ace or a bluff. The value range is any ace. It's just any hand containing the ace of spades or ace of diamonds. And that's quite a few combinations. To bluff here on the river, they would have needed to lead the turn with something like jack 10 and then be bluffing the river with the jack kicker or the queen kicker. It just doesn't make sense. The hands that bluff on the turn have the showdown value to check the river and are not bluffing the river, if you think about it. So this is a really cool textual exception where there's just not going to be many bluffs whatsoever in this big blind range. So villain's king jack is once again a bluff catcher. This is once again a very underbluff node. And if you call with the king jack, you will simply lose a ton of the time, and it's probably losing. Live players sometimes make this fold because they're more intuitive. Live players have been around the block and they can look at their opponent and say, aha, that's old man Bill. Old man Bill ain't doing this without an ace. And they're right about that because old man Bill isn't. But even the young guy with the headphones probably isn't bluffing this spot. And even that girl over there that's been aggressive so far and has been 3-betting lots of hands probably isn't bluffing this spot. So live players can kind of get a feel for that. They get a vibe for that and they fold in this spot. But online players look at their hand and they go, okay, I've got kings full. It's ace, king, king, and I have a king. I'm not folding. If I fold this, I'm folding all of my range. I'm folding too much of my range. I can't fold this or I'll be exploited. But that is to have your priorities wrong. To say that you don't want to fold this hand because you're worried about being exploited is essentially to say that people are exploiting you and that your goal is to defend against being exploited rather than exploit them. And that's a very lousy goal when you need to beat 9 BB per 100 rake or whatever you guys are playing, whatever you're paying in rake. So I think this is a fold. And it's gross and it's disgusting. But probably villain shouldn't ever call here with a king against this pool. And I'm probably not bluffing this spot either, because I don't expect anyone to fold a king here. Like if I make this bluff and I'm like, okay, I'm repping an ace, he has to fold a king sometimes, I'm just going to burn money because I know it's an underfolded spot because humans are bad at recognizing when their hand is a bluff catcher and when they have bad relative hand strength in underbluff spots. So here's another hand that we should finish on that I think is relevant to this topic of spots that are just very underbluffed where you should be folding even if you have quite a good hand. 3-betting here, button versus UTG. Call queen 10-5. We go for a check here, which is a little weird. You can definitely just start by betting range here, but for whatever reason we decided to check. The turn is ace of clubs. Check and big bet. When you see this at low stakes or micro stakes, again, you're not playing against me. I know I'm crazy and spewy and making all kinds of nonsense plays. You're not playing against me, right? So don't worry about that. Your opponents here, when you are the under the gun player, generally just have ace king, or they have some ace queen, or they have king jack, or they have ace 5, or they have ace 10. They're not really bluffing this spot at all, because to bluff, you'd have to bluff with jack 10 or jacks or an under pair, and you've 3-bet against under the gun. So it's very hard for you to have a bluff here unless you're just going nuts with 9s, and very few people are. A common theme today has been the texture of triple Broadway or 3 fairly big cards. It doesn't even need to be like 3 literal Broadways. It could be like king jack 9 or queen 10-8 or something like that. These textures are really difficult for people to bluff enough on because on triple Broadway texture, your value combos explode. They just multiply. You have a lot of them and you have very few intuitive or natural bluffs. So this is a texture that mass data says is very underbluffed, and it's intuitive and easy to see why it's underbluffed as a human. So villain calls here. And if I'd got to this spot with king queen, I would just fold. Look at these stakes. Like if you arrive here with a random ace or king queen or king 10 or something, you should just be folding these hands. Like they have a gutter and they're dead and your opponents are grossly underbluffing this at low stakes and micro stakes. So you don't want to invest a penny here with these hands. At higher stakes against good regs and stuff, different story, but be careful here. At low stakes, these spots are very difficult to bluff in, even though flop went check check, even with that being true. Villain calls here, and as the button, I expected their range to be not very much king jack or ace queen or anything. Expect those hands or 10s, expect those to usually lead the turn or check raise if they have checked. So expect this to be mostly one pair: ace jack, queen jack, king queen, jack 10, pocket jacks, ace 8, ace 9. It's a pretty weak range, right? Overall, there'll be some 2-pair in there as well, which, you know, is normal because rec players are freaked out by the presence of king jack and the presence of aces in our range or whatever, and don't want to always play 2-pair very quickly here. So I get that. There is some 2-pair here too. And I go for this sizing, which is a small overbet, and I think I should make a smaller overbet. I think this is a little bit wasteful. It's not quite right. I could even just go like B66 here and probably get a lot of folds from like king queen and the like, but I want to kind of ensure that that 1-pair region is folding at a really high frequency, or a better way to put this would be, I want to ensure that a very large amount of humans in pool are folding those combos to the river bet. So I actually like this line from us. I think this is good. And if you face this as the under the gun player, you are very rarely going to see pocket 8s, the hand we actually had here. And instead, you're just going to see value a very large amount of the time because it's very counterintuitive to take this line as a bluff. Now, if the flop was bet, that's even more the case, right? The flop check's a little bit weird here, but still, people just don't really bluff in this manner at low stakes and micro stakes. So don't level yourself into calling in spots like this with 1-pair. Villain did call here, and I was not at all shocked to see 2-pair. When Villain made this call, I was fully expecting to see ace queen or something like that, or ace 10, because I think that when they have their 1-pair region that we talked about, they're just very rarely one to call this spot, and good for them. You know, this is an underbluffed and overfolded spot. That's very plausible that a spot can be both underbluffed and overfolded because pool isn't really creative enough to grasp the bluffing opportunity, but is aware enough to know that others aren't bluffing this spot that much. So you want to hero fold this situation again in your pools. It's just another texture and line combination where you want to fold. And unfortunately here we ran into the top of the opponent's range. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you're getting the idea. Board texture, naturalness of bluffing, how many air combos you start with in a spot, what line your opponent's taken and how intimidating that is and how it makes you not want to bluff, like in the first hand today. These are all factors you want to think about when identifying these underbluff spots. You want to let go of your absolute hand strength entirely and be super objective about whether you have a bluff catcher or not. And if you start there, and if you're a CPS viewer, definitely go and just rewatch Grade 2 Lecture 8 and just make sure you really understand how that bluff catching system works. That's a theoretical course, so it talks about blockers a bit. But blockers are not the true EV factor that matters the most. Blockers are a tie-breaking factor if you're really unsure, and you should begin by trying to understand how often your opponents are likely to be bluffing or how many of your opponents are likely to be bluffing in certain situations. I think it always helps to zoom out and look at it as a kind of pool scenario rather than is this guy bluffing, you know. It's more like how many of 100 humans at these stakes even find any bluffs in this spot. That's a wonderful question to ask. It's really helpful. All right, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this one, and we'll be back with more True EV content soon. Hope you're enjoying your subscription, and I'll see you later. Bye for now.